The air in the Galactic Defense Academy's main lecture hall was cool and carried a faint metallic scent. It was a smell Cadet HFY had grown used to over the last 6 months. She sat straight in her seat, her dark eyes fixed on the instructor at the front, Commander Vec. His gray, reptilian skin seemed to absorb the room's bright light. Around her, dozens of other cadets from across the galaxy shifted and murmured. They were all so different, some with scales, some with fur, some with multiple arms. HFY, with her simple human form, often felt plain in comparison, especially when compared to Cadet Taemin. He was a Kthar, a species from a high-gravity world. He was tall and broad, with a natural, intimidating presence. His skin had a subtle, rock-like texture, and faint, bioluminescent lines traced patterns along his arms. The Kthar were famous for one thing: their natural ability to channel and control energy. They could turn their own bodies into living weapons. Taemin and his group often sat together, their confidence filling the space around them. They rarely spoke to HFY, but when they did, it was with a polite, unshakable sense of superiority. Humanity was the new, soft species. They were clever, good with technology, but they had no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no energy conduction. They were, in the eyes of many, physically unremarkable. Commander Vec's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Silence," he said, not loudly, but with an authority that demanded obedience. The room fell quiet instantly. "Your performance in simulated combat has been predictable. You rely on your technology. You rely on what you are born with. You have forgotten the most important tool, your mind." He activated a holographic display showing a complex, forested landscape. "This is the Gauntlet, a live fire capture the flag exercise in the holographic forest. The terrain is real. The obstacles are real. The stun blasts from your opponents will feel very real." A few cadets shifted nervously. To encourage creative thinking, Vec continued, a glint in his large, black eyes. "You will not be using your standard-issue plasma rifles." A wave of surprise rippled through the room. Taemin's expression was one of mild interest, as if the challenge was beneath him. Instead, Vec announced, "You will be issued training weapons. These weapons are keyed to your species database. They represent the most primitive, effective combat tool your people used to rise to prominence. This is a lesson in fundamentals, in understanding the root of conflict." One by one, cadets were called to the front. A cadet from a species with whip-like tentacles was given a training weapon that mimicked a barbed, electrified lash. Another, from a heavy-gravity world, was given a small, incredibly dense shield. Then it was Taemin's turn. He strode confidently to the front. The quartermaster scanned his biometrics and the database lit up. He was handed a sleek, metallic rod. When Taemin gripped it, the ends ignited with beams of controlled, sizzling orange plasma. It was a training version of the Kthar's innate energy blades. A murmur of appreciation went through his friends. He was being given a version of his own natural weapon. He was being asked to use what was already his. He returned to his seat, giving the plasma rod a practiced, effortless twirl. Then, Commander Vec called, "Cadet HFY." All eyes turned to her. She stood up, her posture perfect, and walked to the front. She could feel the weight of their gazes. The quartermaster, a bored-looking insectoid being, gestured for her to place her hand on the scanner. A beam of light passed over her. The screen displayed her species, Homo sapiens. Planet, Earth. Designation, soft species. Limited physical enhancement. The quartermaster's antennae twitched. He typed a command. The screen scrolled through data on human history. It flashed images of spears, of bows and arrows, of primitive firearms. The system seemed to struggle, filtering through millennia of conflict. Finally, it settled on an entry. The quartermaster looked from the screen to HFY, his compound eyes unreadable. He turned and went to a large bin at the back of the platform, filled with odd-looking training tools. He rummaged for a moment before pulling out a long, straight object. He walked back and held it out to her. It was a stick. A simple, brown, wooden stick. It was smooth, about as long as she was tall and completely unadorned. It had no buttons, no energy field, no sharp edges. It was just a piece of wood. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then someone snorted. A wave of laughter started low and then grew, filling the vast hall. It was not mean-spirited in a violent way. It was the laughter of pure, unadulterated disbelief. They had given the human a piece of a tree. Ji-hai felt her cheeks grow warm. Her ears burned. She kept her eyes fixed on Commander Vec, who was watching her with his usual impassive expression. She slowly reached out and took the stick. It was lighter than she expected, but solid. The grain felt rough under her fingertips as she turned to walk back to her seat. Taemin spoke, his voice loud enough to carry over the laughter. Try not to trip over it on your way to the forest. This caused another round of chuckles. Ji-hai didn't look at him. She kept walking, her head held high, clutching the wooden staff. She could feel its simplicity, its absurdity. It was a message, louder than any words. This is what your species is worth. This is all you have. She sat down, placing the stick across her knees. Jean, the only other human cadet, gave her a sympathetic look from a few rows away. He had been given a training pistol that fired low-impact kinetic rounds, a primitive firearm. At least it was a weapon. Ji-hai had been given a campfire tool. Commander Vec let the laughter die down on its own. When the room was quiet again, he spoke. The exercise begins in 1 hour. You will be divided into teams. Your objective is simple. Capture the other team's flag and bring it to the extraction point. Failure is a lesson. Humiliation is a teacher. Dismissed. The cadets stood and began to file out, talking excitedly. Ji-hai remained seated for a moment longer. The wooden stick lay on her lap. The laughter echoed in her mind. She felt a deep, cold knot of embarrassment and anger in her stomach. She was a soldier trained in modern tactics and weapons, and they had given her a stick to fight plasma blades. She finally stood up and walked out of the hall, ignoring the lingering stares and whispers. She didn't go to the common room or the mess hall. She went straight to her small, private quarters. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing her in silence. She leaned the stick against the wall and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at it. It looked even more pathetic here, in the sterile metal room. It was a relic from a forgotten age. It belonged in a museum, not on a battlefield. A chime sounded at her door. It was Jean. She let him in. He looked at the stick, then at her. Ji-hai, you have to go to Commander Vec. You have to protest. This isn't a training tool. It's a joke. It's dangerous. Ji-hai didn't answer. She walked over to the stick and picked it up again. She held it in both hands, feeling its balance. Or rather, its lack of balance. It was just a piece of wood. Did you hear me? Jean insisted. You can't go out there with that. Taemin and his friends will... Well, they won't hurt you badly. It's a training exercise, but they will make sure you fail. Spectacularly. I heard you, Ji-hai said softly. Her voice was calm, which seemed to frustrate Jean even more. She closed her eyes, her fingers tracing the length of the wood. And as she did, the sterile room faded away. The memory came not as a clear picture, but as a feeling. A sense of quiet, of focus. She was a child again, no more than 10 years old. She was standing in a small, sunlit dojang in Seoul. The air smelled of old wood and polished floors. Her grandfather, a man with a stern face and kind eyes, was standing before her. He was holding a stick just like this one. A jangbong. The stick is straight, Ji-hai. His voice echoed in her memory, speaking in Korean. It has no curves, no tricks. Teaches your mind to be straight, to be simple, to be direct. He had her hold it, correcting her grip over and over until it was perfect. It wasn't about strength. It was about structure. Your enemy expects a wild swing, her grandfather said, demonstrating a slow, controlled movement. They brace for force, so you do not give them force. You give them a quick thrust to the hand. They expect anger and noise, so you give them silence and a calm mind. The stick is not a club. It is an extension of your will. It is a measure of distance. It is a teacher of patience. He had taught her forms, the Banguk geometry, for years. It was a martial art, yes, but for her grandfather it was something closer to meditation. A way to discipline the body, to quiet the mind. Jihai opened her eyes. The memory faded, but the feeling remained. The knot of anger in her stomach loosened. The heat of humiliation cooled. She looked at the stick in her hands. It was no longer just a piece of wood. It was a jangbong. It had a name. It had a history. It had a purpose. Jean was still talking, his hands moving with frustration. And it's completely unfair. They're setting you up to fail. Jihai turned to him. Her expression had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a quiet focus. No, Jean, she said. They are not. She walked to the center of the room, holding the staff properly now, her grip firm and correct. She took a slow, deep breath and began to move. It was a simple, basic form. She wasn't swinging the stick like a club. She was turning her body, letting the staff flow with her, using its length to define the space around her.
Osrust, o deflection, o smooth circular motion.
The movements were fluid and precise. The soft swish of the wood cutting through the air was the only sound. Jean stopped talking and just watched, his mouth slightly agape. He wasn't seeing a helpless cadet with a primitive tool anymore. He was seeing a martial artist. He was seeing discipline. Jihai finished the form and returned to a ready stance, her breathing even. She looked at the staff, then at Jean. They see a joke, she said, her voice steady. I see a lever. I see a measure of distance. Let them have their plasma. I have this. She knew the challenge was immense. She knew Taemin was stronger, faster, and armed with a weapon that could sear through metal. But for the first time since she was handed the stick, a small, calm smile touched her lips. The game had just changed. She just had to make everyone else see it. The door to the armory bay hissed open, and the cadets of Blue Team filed in. The air was thick with the low hum of energy cells and the sharp scent of ozone. Racks along the walls held the training versions of their primitive weapons. Jihai walked in, her wooden staff held firmly in one hand. The other cadets in her team glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked annoyed. She was a liability and everyone knew it. Their team leader was a tall, insectoid cadet named Kale. He had been given a pair of curved, shock-producing blades that fit over his upper limbs. He looked at the team, his multifaceted eyes taking in each of them. Listen up, Kale said, his voice a dry rustle. Our objective is the flag at the peak of the northern ridge. Red Team, led by Taemin, will be coming from the south. We move fast, we secure the high ground, and we defend. His eyes rested on Jihai for an uncomfortable second.
Cadet here.
Your role will be to observe from the rear. Provide tactical data. Do not engage. Jihai simply nodded. She had expected this. They saw the stick and saw someone who needed to be protected, kept out of the way. She didn't argue. Arguing would be a waste of energy. A few minutes later, they were transported to the edge of the holographic forest. The air was cool and carried the smell of damp earth and pine. The trees were tall and dense, their canopies blocking out much of the artificial sunlight, creating a world of shifting shadows. The moment they stepped into the woods, the sounds of the academy vanished, replaced by an eerie silence. Kale signaled, and the Blue Team moved out. They were a mix of species, some moving on two legs, some on four, some skittering through the undergrowth. They moved with purpose, their training weapons held ready. Jihai followed at the back, her senses alert. She held her staff not like a weapon, but like a walking stick, its tip occasionally tapping a root or a stone. The sound was soft and natural, lost in the rustle of leaves up ahead. She could hear the occasional sizzle and pop of a plasma weapon as Red Team members encountered Blue Team scouts. The gauntlet had begun. She saw flashes of light through the trees and heard the frustrated shouts of cadets whose armor had been tagged. Rendering them out of the exercise, Jihai did not run towards the fight. She moved parallel to the main action, her eyes scanning not for enemies, but for the land itself. She noted a steep, muddy bank that would be hard to climb. She saw a patch of thick, thorny bushes that would slow anyone down. She saw a fallen log that created a perfect, hidden path. This was what her grandfather had meant. The stick was a teacher of the environment. Suddenly, a blue team cadet, a furry creature with large eyes, came scrambling back through the bushes. His shoulder armor was scorched black. Two of them, just ahead, he panted to Kale. They took out Jax and Vora. Kale cursed. They're pushing hard. We need to hold this line. He directed his team to take up defensive positions behind a cluster of large rocks. Jihai moved to the side, staying in the shadow of a large tree. She watched. She saw two red team cadets advance. One was a Kthar, like Taemin, but smaller, wielding a plasma rod. The other was a bulky, rock-skinned cadet with a heavy, stone maul. They moved confidently, their weapons glowing. The Kthar cadet fired a burst of plasma towards the rocks. The blue team ducked. The rock-skinned cadet charged, his maul smashing against a boulder, sending chips of stone flying. This was their strategy. Overwhelming force. It was effective. It was also predictable. Jihai saw a different path. While the two red team cadets were focused on the main group, she slipped away. Using the fallen log she had spotted earlier, she circled around behind them. She moved silently, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the damp earth. Her staff helped her balance as she navigated the uneven ground. She emerged from behind a thicket, now directly behind the two red team cadets. They had their backs to her, completely focused on hammering Kale's position. The Kthar cadet, whose name was Rick, laughed as he fired another plasma burst. They are pinned. Push forward. This was the moment. Jihai took a calm breath. She did not feel anger or fear. She felt a quiet focus, like she was back in her grandfather's dojang. This was just another form. She stepped out of the shadows. Rick was the greater threat with his ranged weapon. She moved towards him, not running, but with a swift, smooth walk. He was so focused on the fight ahead he didn't hear her approach until she was almost upon him. He started to turn, a look of surprise on his face. He began to raise his plasma rod. It was a wide, sweeping motion, designed to cut her in half. Jihai did not block it. Her wooden stick would be vaporized. Instead, she did what he did not expect. She stepped inside the arc of his swing. As his arm came around, she used her own staff not to strike him, but to intercept his arm. She placed the middle of her staff against his wrist and pushed, guiding his momentum just past her body. It was a simple, precise redirection. The move was so subtle, so devoid of aggressive force, that it completely confused him. His swing went wild, throwing him off balance for a split second. In that second, Jihai reversed her grip and, with the other end of the staff, delivered a sharp, crisp tap to the back of his weapon hand. It wasn't a hard strike. It wouldn't break bones, but it hit a cluster of nerves. Rick yelped in surprise and pain, his fingers spasming open. The plasma rod clattered to the forest floor and deactivated. Before he could recover, Jihai was already moving past him. She didn't look back. She knew he was disarmed and disoriented. Her next problem was the rock-skinned cadet, Borv, who had finally noticed the commotion. Borv turned, his small eyes wide with confusion. He saw Rick clutching his hand and the human with the stick already moving away. He roared and lifted his heavy stone maul, charging at her. This was pure brute force. Jihai stood her ground. She held her staff in front of her, horizontal to the ground. As Borv brought his maul down in a crushing blow, she didn't try to stop it. That would have been impossible. Instead, she angled her staff, presenting its surface to the falling maul. The maul slammed into the center of the wooden staff. The wood, surprisingly tough, did not break. Instead, the force of the blow was transferred along its length. Jihai absorbed the impact, letting her arms and knees bend, guiding the energy downwards and away from her. It was like catching a heavy ball. The maul slid down the angled wood and slammed harmlessly into the dirt next to her foot. Borv was now overcommitted, his body leaning forward from the force of his own missed attack. Jihai completed the motion. As the maul hit the ground, she pivoted on one foot. Using the end of her staff that was now pointing towards Borv, she thrust it forward like a spear, jabbing it hard into the side of his knee joint. It was another precise, non-lethal strike. Borv grunted as his leg buckled. He stumbled to one knee, his maul now stuck in the soft ground. He was not out, but he was down and vulnerable. The whole encounter had taken less than 10 seconds. Jihai didn't wait. She didn't try to finish them. She had achieved her goal. She had broken their attack and created an opening. She turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as she had arrived. Back behind the rocks, Kale and his team stared in stunned silence. They had seen it all. They had seen the human girl with the stick walk calmly up to two of Red Team's strongest fighters and, with two simple, almost gentle movements, disarm one and disable the other. She hadn't used strength. She had used geometry. She had used their own momentum against them. Rick was still shaking his hand, looking at his deactivated weapon on the ground in disbelief. Borv was struggling to get back to his feet, his knee throbbing. Kale snapped out of his shock. "Now! Move!" he barked. The blue team surged forward. With the two red team cadets neutralized, they easily overwhelmed the position and pushed the line forward. Later, as the blue team regrouped in a small clearing, the mood had shifted. The cadets who had looked at Jihai with pity or annoyance now looked at her with a new, uncertain respect. They had seen the stick in action. It wasn't a joke. It was a tool. Kale approached her. "That was effective," he said, his rustling voice hesitant. "Your assignment is changed. You are on forward scout duty. Find their flanks. Do what you just did." Jihai simply nodded again. She looked down at her wooden staff. It was now scarred with a blackened, smoldering groove where Borv's maul had struck it. The wood had held. Her grandfather's lessons had held. She looked towards the sounds of the ongoing battle, towards where Taemin would be. He would have heard about this by now. He would be angry. An angry opponent was a predictable opponent. She gripped her staff and moved forward, a quiet ghost in a war of noise and light. The game was indeed changing. The news traveled through the red team comms like an electric shock. It was broken, confused reports at first. The human, she has a stick. She took out Rick and Borv. The messages made no sense. How could a wooden stick defeat plasma and a stone maul? Taemin, leading the push towards the blue team's flag, felt a hot spike of irritation. It was a fluke, a lucky trick. His team was winning. The blue team was falling back. This was a minor distraction. He stood on a rocky outcrop, looking down at the forest below. His plasma rod felt warm and right in his hand, a natural extension of his own power. "Ignore the human," he said into his comms unit, his voice sharp. "She is a mosquito. Focus on the main objective. Kale and his fighters are the real threat. Push forward." But the mosquito would not be ignored. Over the next hour, the reports kept coming, and they grew more frustrating. The human was not fighting. She was haunting them. A scout pair on the eastern flank reported in, embarrassed. They had been moving through a narrow gully when the human appeared above them on the ridge. She didn't attack. She used her stick to lever a large, loose rock down the slope. It wasn't meant to hit them, just to block their path and force them to take a long, tiring detour. Another team, setting up an ambush, found their carefully chosen position suddenly filled with a swarm of irritated, stinging insects. The human had quietly disturbed a nest with the end of her staff, then vanished. She was a ghost in the forest. She never engaged in a direct fight. She tripped cadets with a swift, low sweep of her stick when they tried to charge. She used its length to jab at the hands of those holding weapons, making them fumble. She deflected plasma blasts, the wood charring but not breaking, always moving, always fading back into the trees. She wasn't scoring many kills, but she was slowing the red team down. She was wasting their energy. She was making them angry. And an angry soldier was a careless soldier. Taemin could feel the control of the battle slipping. His team's advance, once a powerful, unstoppable wave, was now stumbling and hesitant. His cadets were starting to look over their shoulders, jumping at every rustle of leaves. They were wasting power on wild plasma shots at shadows. This is ridiculous. Taemin snarled, smacking his plasma rod against a tree trunk, leaving a deep, sizzling scar. One soft species with a piece of wood is tying up my entire flank. His second-in-command, a nervous cadet named Lorik, nodded anxiously. She's using the forest, Taemin. She knows we are stronger, so she does not fight our strength. She avoids it. That is cowardice.
Taemin snapped.
Is it? Lorik ventured carefully. Or is it tactics? Taemin didn't have an answer. His pride was burning. The laughter he had led in the lecture hall now felt like a distant, foolish echo. The joke was on him. He had to end this. He had to crush this humiliation personally. Change of plans, he declared, his voice cold. The main force will continue to press Kale's position. But I am taking a squad. We are going hunting. For the human. This was a mistake, and Lorik knew it. Dividing their forces was against basic tactics when they were so close to the objective. But he saw the look in Taemin's eyes and said nothing. Meanwhile, Jihai was a shadow. She moved with a quiet economy that conserved her strength. She drank from a stream while the red team cadets were burning through their energy reserves in frustration. She wasn't thinking about winning the war. She was thinking about winning the next moment. Her staff was her guide, her probe, her lever. It tested the depth of a stream before she crossed. It moved a branch aside without making a sound. It was a part of her. She found a perfect spot near a fast-moving creek. The water was too deep and the current too strong to cross easily. The only way across was a fallen tree that acted as a natural bridge. It was a perfect choke point. She knew the red team would have to use it to outflank the blue team's main defense. She didn't plan to defend it. She planned to use it. She hid in the thick bushes on the blue team's side of the creek and waited. She didn't have to wait long. Soon, a squad of 4 red team cadets emerged from the trees on the far side. They were looking for a way across. They saw the log bridge and pointed. Jihai watched them. They were cautious at first, scanning the other side. They saw nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the peaceful gurgle of the creek. Their leader, a cadet with sharp, avian features, signaled for them to cross point one by one. They started walking across the narrow, slippery log. It was a slow, careful process. They had to balance, their arms out, their attention focused entirely on their feet. This was when they were most vulnerable. When the second cadet was in the middle of the log, Jihai moved. She didn't come out of the bushes. She simply extended her wooden staff from her hiding place. She didn't swing it at the cadets. She placed the end of it against the log bridge, right where it met the bank on her side. Then, using all her body weight as a lever, she pushed. The log was already unstable. Her push was the final nudge it needed. It shifted, then rolled slightly. The cadet in the middle of the log let out a squawk of surprise. His arms flailed. He tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. With a loud splash, he tumbled into the cold, fast-moving creek. The current immediately swept him downstream, away from the battle. He was out of the exercise. The other cadets on the log froze, wobbling precariously. The ones on the far bank shouted in frustration, firing wild plasma blasts across the creek. But Jihai was already gone, hidden deep in the bushes once more. She had not fired a shot. She had not thrown a punch. She had used a simple lever to remove an enemy from the field. This was the final report that reached Taemin. She tipped Gren into the river. He's washed halfway to the extraction point. That was it. The last of his patience snapped. The flag was secondary now. His mission was clear. He would find the human. He would show everyone what happened when you challenged a Kthar with a stick. He moved through the forest with a new, furious purpose, his squad struggling to keep up. He ignored the main battle sounds now. He was listening for something else, for silence, for an absence of noise that felt out of place. And then, he saw her. She was moving along a ridge line above him, a silent figure against the green-gray trees. She was alone. She held the wooden staff lightly, using it to help her climb. Taemin held up a fist, stopping his squad. A cruel smile touched his lips. There, he whispered. Surround her. Cut off her escape. She is not getting away this time. His squad fanned out, moving to encircle the ridge. Taemin began his climb, his powerful limbs carrying him quickly up the steep slope. The hunt was over. Now, it was time for the lesson. Ji-hai felt the change in the forest before she saw it. The birdsong stopped. The normal, background rustle of small creatures ceased. The air grew still. She was no longer the hunter. She was the prey. She paused on the ridge, her staff held ready. Her eyes scanned the trees below. She saw a flash of movement to the left, then another to the right. They were surrounding her. She had been too effective, and now Taemin had taken the bait. She had drawn the red team's leader away from the main fight. This was both a success and a terrible danger. There was only one path off the ridge that wasn't already being closed off. A steep, rocky climb upwards towards a tall, solitary stone spire. It was a defensive position but also a dead end. A trap of her own making. She had no choice. She turned and began to climb, using her staff to test the stability of the rocks before she put her weight on them. Below, Taemin saw her retreat. He laughed, a short, harsh sound. She's running. She has nowhere to go. He climbed faster, his plasma rod scorching the rock where he gripped it for balance. His squad followed, sealing off the base of the spire. Ji-hai was cornered. She reached the top. It was a flat, rocky area about 10 meters across, open to the sky. The only features were a few large boulders. Behind her was a sheer drop. This was it. The final stand. Taemin reached the top a moment later. He stood at the edge of the flat area, his chest heaving slightly from the climb. His eyes burned with a cold fire. The rest of his squad remained on the slopes below, watching. This was his fight. No more tricks, human, he snarled, his voice echoing in the quiet space. No more rivers to push me into. No more rocks to drop. It is just you and me. He ignited his plasma rod fully. The air sizzled and hummed with the weapon's power. This ends now. Ji-hai said nothing. She stood in the center of the clearing, her feet planted firmly. She held her wooden staff in both hands, one near the end, one in the middle. It was a basic, ready stance. The stick was scarred and blackened from the day's fights. It looked pitiful against the glowing, orange plasma. You see, Taemin said, taking a step forward. He was enjoying this. This is the difference between our species. You cling to dead wood. We command living energy. This will prove it. He lunged. It was not a finesse move. It was a brutal, horizontal sweep meant to cut her staff in half and knock her off her feet. The power behind it was immense. Ji-hai did not block. She couldn't. The plasma would destroy her weapon. Instead, she dropped into a low crouch. The searing energy passed over her head. So close she felt the heat on her hair. The move was so fast and so unexpected that Taemin was left overextended for a split second. And in that second, Ji-hai rose and thrust the end of her staff like a spear, aiming for his exposed side. He was too strong and his armor too tough for it to hurt him, but the sharp poke to his ribs was surprising and irritating. He grunted and stepped back, his confidence flickering for a moment. He attacked again. A series of faster, more controlled strikes. High, low, diagonal. Each one was meant to kill. Each one was met not with resistance, but with redirection. Ji-hai moved like water. She used her staff to guide the plasma rod's path, angling it away from her body. The wood charred at each contact, sending little sparks into the air, but it held. She gave ground, circling, letting him spend his energy. He was getting angrier. His attacks became wilder, less precise. He was relying entirely on his strength, expecting to overwhelm her through sheer force. He was talking now, taunting her. Stop dancing. Fight me. You are just delaying the inevitable. This is why your species is weak. You have no power. Ji-hai remained silent. Her breathing was even. Her mind was calm. She was listening to her grandfather's voice. They expect anger. You give them silence. She was analyzing his patterns. Every time he prepared for a major swing, he shifted his weight to his back foot. Every time he thrust, he dropped his guard for a fraction of a second. She was not trying to win a fight of strength. She was solving a problem. He was the problem. The plasma rod was just a part of it. The battle below had grown quiet. Both blue and red team cadets, drawn by the commotion, had gathered at the base of the spire. They watched the duel in stunned silence. They saw the furious, powerful Cthar, a warrior born to fight, being neutralized again and again by a human with a stick. It was like watching a storm rage against a deeply rooted tree. The storm was loud and dramatic, but the tree simply endured. Taemin was tiring. The constant, furious attacks were draining his energy, both physically and the power cell of his weapon. The glow of his plasma rod was slightly less bright. His breath came in ragged gasps. The humiliation was a fire in his chest, burning away his reason. "This is over," he roared. He raised the plasma rod high above his head for a final, massive, two-handed overhead smash. It was a move of pure, unchecked fury. It put all of his strength, all of his weight, into one blow that would shatter her staff and her alike. It was the move Ji-hai had been waiting for. He expected her to dodge sideways. He expected her to try to block. He expected fear. She gave him none of those things. As the plasma rod came down like a meteor, Ji-hai did something utterly illogical. She stepped forward, directly into the path of the blow. But she did not step into the blade. She stepped inside its arc. As Taemin committed to the swing, she was suddenly there, right in front of him. She raised her staff not horizontally to block, but vertically. One end was pointed at the ground, the other at the sky. The plasma rod did not hit the center of her staff. Instead, it slammed into the upper portion, just below her top hand. The force was incredible, but because her staff was angled, the energy was driven down into the ground. The wood groaned and splintered, but it did not break. More importantly, Taemin's arms were jarred by the impact. His grip loosened, and in that crucial moment, with him completely overcommitted and off balance, Ji-hai moved. She twisted her staff, leveraging his own trapped weapon. She used his forward momentum against him, pulling him even further off his feet. At the same time, she swung the lower end of her staff in a short, sharp arc. There was a loud crack as the wood connected solidly with the side of Taemin's helmet. It wasn't a killing blow. It wasn't even a hard one, but it was precise. It hit the helmet's sensor node perfectly. A loud, electronic buzz sounded. A red light on Taemin's shoulder plate lit up. Stun. Eliminated. The plasma rod flickered and died. Taemin stood frozen, his arms still numb from the impact, his mind unable to process what had happened. The overhead smash, his signature finishing move, had been his own undoing. The human hadn't met his power. She had redirected it, used it, and finished him with a simple, precise tap. The silence at the base of the spire was absolute. No one cheered. No one moved. They just stared. Ji-hai took a step back. Her staff was badly damaged. A deep, blackened gash almost cutting it in two. She was breathing heavily, but her hands were steady. She looked at Taemin, whose face was a mask of shock and dawning humiliation. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked to the red team's flag, which was planted nearby, and pulled it from the ground. The blue team cadets below finally erupted into cheers. The human with the wooden stick had won. The silence in Commander Vek's office was heavier than the air in the forest. It was the silence of a lesson being learned. Ji-hai stood at attention, her posture perfect. Her scarred wooden staff was held loosely at her side. Across from her stood Taemin. He could not stand still. Shame and anger made small tremors run through his body. The bright orange glow of his natural energy nodes was dim, almost extinguished. Commander Vek stood behind his metal desk, his reptilian eyes moving from one cadet to the other. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's systems. Finally, he spoke. "The gauntlet is a test of fundamentals." Vek began, his voice flat and unemotional. "It is designed to strip away your assumptions."
Cadet Taemin.
"What was your assumption?"
Taemines javtaitened.
He stared at a point on the wall behind Vek. "That victory belongs to the strongest, to the one with the most powerful weapon." Was your weapon powerful? Vec asked. Yes, Commander. Did you win? The question hung in the air. Taemin's shoulders slumped slightly.
No, Commander.
Vec turned his gaze to Jihai.
Cadet HFY.
What is your weapon? Jihai looked straight ahead. A wooden staff, Commander. Vec almost smiled. It was a slight, thin movement of his lips. Is that all? She paused, then answered.
No, Commander.
It is a lever, a measure of distance, a tool for redirection. Explain. Vec commanded. She took a small breath. I could not break his strength, so I did not try. I used it. When he pushed, I pulled. When he swung wide, I moved close. The staff helped me control the space between us. It let me turn his power into his weakness. Vec nodded slowly. He tapped a console on his desk. A large holographic display lit up the room, showing sensor recordings from the battle on the spire. He froze the image at the final moment. Taemin's overhead smash, Jihai stepping inside the arc, the precise angle of her staff. You see here, Vec said, pointing a clawed finger. Cadet Taemin uses a classic Kthar crushing maneuver. It utilizes your species' natural upper body strength. It is designed to overwhelm an opponent's block. He looked at Taemin. You expected her to block. You expected a contest of force. You were prepared to win that contest. He shifted the pointer to Jihai's stance. Cadet Jihai did not provide you with a contest. She provided you with a structural problem. She turned your linear downward force into a rotational energy. She turned your own body into a lever against you. The final strike to your helmet was not the victory. It was merely the period at the end of the sentence. The victory was achieved the moment you committed to that swing and she decided not to meet it, but to use it. Taemin was finally looking at the screen, his eyes wide. He was seeing the fight not as a warrior, but as a student. He saw the geometry of his defeat. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a lucky trick. It was physics. It was applied mathematics. It was cold, brutal logic. The Kthar weapon is power, Vec stated, turning off the hologram. The human weapon is control. Control of space. Control of momentum. Control of the encounter. And most importantly, control of self. He looked directly at Taemin. You lost your control. You allowed irritation to become anger, and anger to become recklessness. A soldier who cannot control his own mind has already lost, no matter what weapon he holds. He then looked at Jihai's staff. You all saw a primitive tool. She saw a key. She did not fight the Kthara strength. She unlocked the door it was guarding, the door to his imbalance, his predictability, his ego. Vec stood up straight, addressing them both. The lesson of the gauntlet is not about what you were given. It is about what you did with it. This lesson is now concluded. Dismissed. Taemin turned and left the office first, his steps quick and heavy. The door hissed shut behind him. Jihai was about to follow when Vec spoke again.
Cadet HFY.
She stopped. Yes, Commander? That stick, he said, nodding to the damaged staff in her hand. Do not discard it. It is a better teacher than I am. It is honest. It only works if you understand it. Jihai looked down at the wood, feeling the rough, charred groove. I understand, Commander. She left the office and walked out into the main corridor of the academy. The usual sounds of cadets moving to and from classes felt different now. The stares were different. They were not stares of pity or mockery. They were stares of curiosity, of respect, of confusion. She saw Jean waiting for her, a huge grin on his face. I heard. Everyone has heard. You beat Taemin. Commander Vec gave a whole lecture about it in the debrief. Jihai allowed herself a small, tired smile. It wasn't about beating him, Jean. It was about the exercise. But you won, he said, falling into step beside her. She didn't answer. She just kept walking. Later that day, she went to the quiet observation deck that looked out at the stars. She needed to think. She held the wooden staff, running her fingers over its scars. It had been a tool of shame. Then it became a weapon of surprise. Now, she didn't know what it was. A soft sound made her turn. Taemin was standing at the entrance to the deck. He wasn't in his uniform, just simple training clothes. He looked less imposing without his armor. He hesitated, then walked towards her. He stopped a few meters away, his eyes on the staff in her hands. "I have re-watched the sensor data 17 times," he said, his voice quiet. It lacked its usual edge of arrogance. "I still cannot find a point where I could have won, once I committed to that final attack." Jihai said nothing. She just waited. He finally looked at her. "My assumption was wrong. I looked at you and I saw a lack of power. I did not see the discipline." He gestured to the staff. Would you show me?" Jihai was surprised. This was the last thing she had expected. "Show you what?" "The first thing," he said. "The most basic form. I need to understand how it begins." She looked at him for a long moment. She saw no mockery in his eyes, only a genuine, burning need to know. The need of a warrior who has just discovered a new, entire continent of warfare that he never knew existed. She nodded. "It starts with the stance." She moved to the center of the open deck, her feet shifting to a solid, balanced position. She held the staff in the basic two-handed grip. Taemin watched, his entire focus on her, on the wood, on the simple, straight lines of the form. The stick was no longer a symbol of mockery. Under the cold light of the stars, it was becoming something else. A bridge. A week had passed since the gauntlet. The story of the human and the wooden stick had spread through the academy. It was no longer a joke. It was a legend. And like all legends, it drew people in. Jihai was in one of the smaller, unused training rooms. She was going through the slow, deliberate forms of the Banguk geometry. Her new staff, an identical replacement for the broken one, whispered as it cut through the air. Her movements were a meditation. Thrust, block, turn, deflect. Each motion had a purpose. Each stance held a meaning. She was alone, or so she thought. She finished a form and returned to the ready stance, her breathing even. A soft sound from the doorway made her turn. Taemin stood there. He was not alone. Behind him were 3 other cadets. Jihai recognized them. There was Borv, the rock-skinned cadet whose knee she had buckled. There was Rick, the Kthar she had disarmed by the creek. And there was the avian cadet, Gren, who had fallen from the log bridge into the water. They were a group of her former opponents. For a moment no one spoke. The memory of the forest hung between them. Then, Taemin took a step forward. "We have been talking," he said. His voice was different. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a new, careful tone. "We watched the sensor logs. All of them. Not just our fights, but the others too." Borv, his heavy arms crossed, grunted. "You did not fight fair." Jihai met his gaze. Was the exercise about fairness? Or was it about winning? Rick, the Kthar, smiled a little. It was a strange expression on his face. "He has a point. The rules were to capture the flag. You did that. We were following the rules of a duel. You were following the rules of the mission." Taemin gestured to the staff in her hand. "We do not understand this. We understand power. We understand energy shields and plasma and strength. This," he shook his head, "this is a mystery. Commander Vex said it was about control. We wish to learn about this control." Jihai looked at the small group. They were the best fighters in the academy. They had been her enemies. Now they were standing in front of her, asking to be taught. It was the last thing she had ever imagined. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because," Taemin said, his voice low and intense, "the galaxy is big. We have been taught that our way is the strongest way. You proved it is not the only way. An enemy we do not understand is an enemy we cannot defeat. We need to understand." He was not asking as a friend. He was asking as a soldier. He saw a tactical advantage, a gap in his knowledge, and he was determined to fill it. Jihai thought about her grandfather. He had said the art was not for fighting. It was for building the mind, for creating discipline. Perhaps that was a lesson this group needed more than any other. "Okay," she said. She picked up a few extra training staffs she had requested from the quartermaster. She handed one to each of them. They felt awkward and clumsy in their hands. Gren held his like it was a fragile bird. Borv gripped his so tightly Jihai thought it might snap. The first lesson, Jihai said, taking her own stance, is not how to hit, it is how to stand. She showed them the basic ready stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, one foot slightly forward, knees slightly bent. It felt simple, but it was the foundation of everything. Taemin copied her. His movements sharp and precise. But he was standing like a statue, full of tension. You are holding your strength, Jihai observed. You are ready to push. You must be ready to receive. She walked over to him and gently pushed his shoulder. He was solid and did not move. You are strong, but you are rooted like a rock. A river flows around a rock. She then gave his stance a small adjustment, shifting his weight. She pushed again. This time he wobbled. His eyes widened in surprise. The stance is not about being immovable, she explained to all of them. It is about being balanced, so you can move in any direction at any time. For the next hour, she drilled them only on the stance and on a single basic thrust. It was boring, repetitive work. These were cadets used to the flash and power of energy weapons. They were used to immediate results. This was slow. This was about patience. Borv grew frustrated. What is the point of this? He grumbled after his 100th thrust. I could crush this stick with my hand. Could you crush it if it was touching your eye? Jihai asked calmly. Borv stopped. What? The point is not the stick, she said. The point is the line. She demonstrated the thrust again, her body and the staff moving as one straight line. It is fast. It is direct. It finds the small opening that a big, crushing swing would miss. You are learning to see the openings. The group fell silent, considering this. They were starting to see it. This was not about replacing their strength. It was about adding a new tool to their mind. The sessions became a regular occurrence. Every other day, the small group would meet in the training room. Jihai was a strict, quiet teacher. She did not praise. She only corrected. She showed them how to use their hips to generate power instead of just their arms. She taught them how to deflect an incoming strike by angling their staff, just as she had against Borv's maul. They were not naturally good at it. They were clumsy, but they were also brilliant, dedicated soldiers. They learned quickly. One day, Taemin was practicing a deflection against a training drone. Instead of using brute force to knock the drone's swinging arm away, he angled his staff. The arm slid off harmlessly, and Taemin was perfectly balanced to deliver a counter-thrust. He stopped the thrust just short of the drone's core. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. He looked at his staff, then at Jihai. A look of pure, clear understanding was on his face. It was not about the wood. It was about the principle of the angled plane, the principle of redirection. He could apply this to his own fighting style. He could use it with a plasma rod, with a shield, with anything. He had learned the lesson. The story of the gauntlet faded, replaced by a new, quiet reality. Jihai was no longer the odd human out. She was Cadet Jihai who understood a different kind of war. And on the training grounds, it was now a common sight to see her moving slowly through a form, surrounded by cadets from the strongest warrior species in the galaxy, all of them following her movements with their simple wooden staffs. They were not just learning to fight with a stick. They were learning to think with a straight and disciplined mind. The stick was just the teacher, and the teacher was silent, patient, and very, very effective. Humanity's gift to the galaxy was not a weapon. It was a way of thought, and it had begun with a single, humble piece of wood.